There is a massive housing shortage in the UK right now, and by the end of 2022, we're looking at a 1 million unit housing shortage, which is staggering when you think about the UK's population that we need to provide homes for. So when we're thinking about that, is there a moral obligation that should be put in place by us to stop buying properties as investors? And really, should we be feeling a dose of guilt in the reality that we're facing today? Personally, I think we need to divide this up into two types of people. We've got the homeowners and the property investors. And even within homeowners, I think that breaks down a little bit, okay? When we're looking at homeowners in general, owner-occupiers, I'm talking about people that have second homes, sometimes third homes. And if we look at a part A of this, you've got your typical middle class family where maybe they own their own house that they live in, and maybe they've got a summer home somewhere else, maybe close to the coast or something. Now, should they be allowed to do this? Well, I think so. Now, the reason I actually think this is absolutely fine is, number one, you actually pay additional stamp duty, which is a tax on purchasing a property when you purchase a second home. There is an argument where that takes away from somebody's house and somebody making that into a home, but often what happens in these seaside resorts is whilst they're not using that property, they're often renting out this property on Airbnb or Booking.com on a nightly basis for would-be holiday makers. So actually, I think that's okay. It's not a huge amount of property, it's not a huge amount of people, and it is actually contributing to the local economy in some ways a lot more than a home occupier would. But what about the rich, the people that have loads and loads of property out there? Well, I actually know a few of these people where their personal residence is a beautiful mansion or massive house, and they own upwards of 20 properties around the world. These range from villas to mansions in Bora Bora to New York City apartments, and really it's just this opulent lifestyle, a life of abundance, if you like. Now, this is where I actually feel a little bit more conflicted, because on the one hand, the types of properties that they're buying, and they do usually leave them empty in my experience, it's not exactly conflicting with the average person spending 100 grand. We're talking multi-million pound or multi-million dollar units around the world. So it doesn't actually impact on that. But most of the people at this level, they're not actually renting them out on Airbnb and getting it back because they're just pure liabilities from them. So the reason I get a bit conflicted with this is that just there's a difference between being ambitious and opulent to outright greedy. And maybe I'd feel different in this situation, but I do feel this is going on the edge of grotesque and a little bit greedy when it's going out there, because ultimately, if you're not getting utilization of that, are you stopping somebody else? Now, again, this comes down to the moral obligation, because are they actually going in with an economic purpose? Yeah, think about the amount of jobs that are created because of them buying that. Think about the upkeep. Think about the taxes they're needing to pay, the service with ongoing cleaning and things like that. So it's a lot of provision and providing of jobs going forward, but I'm more thinking about the moral opportunity that could be available to someone else. Now, I'll be honest, my moral obligation to this and thoughts around this are fairly minimal, but I do believe it edges on that force of greedy. But let me know what you think in the comments on that. Comment below grotesque if you think it's a little bit over top, or comment all good in the comments if you think fair play to them, they've earned the money. But what about us investors, the monsters that we are? Well, I think this comes down to a few key points. The first of which, what are you actually looking to achieve by investing in property? And I know a lot of people talk, what's your why? What's your motivation? Which is true, and by the way, I say that in a mocking way, but I'm big on that as well, and the mindset around it. But why? Like the objective part of why are you buying property? Because the whole point of purchasing property as an investment is so that you can stop working hard for your money and get your money working hard for you. So I know a lot of people that they've worked out their game plan as owning 10 buy-to-let properties. And the whole reason they want to own 10 buy-to-let properties is so that they can spend more time with their kids, travel the world, blah, 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 whatever is their motivation. And then they get to 12, 13, 14 properties, and the people that are like, I want to spend more time with my kids, have paid for their kids to go to private school, and then the people are like, I want to travel the world, haven't flown on a plane since fucking 1556. Okay, the point is, what is your key motivation, and making sure you're aligned to that. Because ultimately, why are you doing it in the first place? By the way, it might not be financially motivated. It might be the preservation of capital. It might be about providing homes for people. Whatever it is, if you are getting in for a specific purpose and you know 10 properties are going to facilitate that financial freedom, then what are you doing after that? And why aren't you actually embracing the benefits of property? And a lot of people catch the property bug and they just keep on reinvesting. The problem with that is if you're looking for financial freedom, next thing you'll know, you'll be 70, 80 years old, have a load of money, but no experience behind you. The second thing to be looking at is risk. What is your risk appetite? Hopefully this seems pretty obvious, but it is good to talk about. The more property you have, the more risk you take on. If I've got one property and that facilitates my financial freedom, I'd actually count that as quite risky because you can go from 100% occupancy to 0% occupancy overnight, right? But the point is, if the tenant does move out and I've got to pay a mortgage, it's a few £100, okay? Most people can financially pay for that if that situation comes up, and if you can't, you probably shouldn't be buying property in the first place, right? So it's not much risk in the grand scheme of things. If you go to, I've got 50 properties, and say there's a huge thing that goes up, let's say there's a massive hike in interest rates. It suddenly goes from 0. Fuck all that it is now, all the way to 6 or 7% over the next year, and you find yourself on variable interest rates. What happens then is suddenly your hugely profitable portfolio is suddenly negatively cash flowing. Can you supplement 50 properties of negative cash flow? A lot of people can, even more people can't. And suddenly you go from multi-millionaire status to having to sell off your portfolio. So the more properties you have on, the more risk aversion you need to have, and risk assessment and mitigation strategies you need to have in place. And finally, morally. Now, where do I stand morally on this? Because are we contributing to rising costs? Yes, but in a fairly nominal way, or minimal way, I would say, in the grand scheme of things. And I actually think we're contributing in a fairly heavy way. I have a very clear line on this, and I genuinely believe that overall property investors have a positive impact on people's lives and the overall economy. And actually we have very little impact on property prices in the long term. Just think logically about this. A owner-occupier is going out there to find their dream home, i.e. making an emotional purchase. That's not a bad thing, it's just an emotional purchase. So logic dictates that you would pay more than is needed to secure your forever home, or your next home at least. As an investor, we should be looking at things objectively. Does it hit my minimum criteria? Yes, I'll buy it. No, I'm not going any higher. Naturally, we have emotions as well, but because we're making those objective decisions, logically speaking, it's very unlikely that we're going to be contributing to those top prices. I do think there's an argument though that if we buy here and we bid there, we are then causing the emotional buyer to bid higher, because theoretically if our price wasn't there in the first place, then they wouldn't need to go above it, right? So there is logic in that, but I've done more videos around that, and I think actually a bigger contributor is the lack of new build properties going up, and I think we need to look at the supply. But again, I've got another video on that. Overall, I think if you're going out there with a value first mentality, and we're not talking about those rogue landlords that have these shithole properties, I'm talking about people like yourself, myself, where we're genuinely trying to add value to the communities that we're purchasing these properties in, and ideally attracting tenants that aren't in the financial position to purchase a house where they can make your house their home. But hey, I've clearly got a biased opinion, and I think it's worth saying that as a property investor, I am going to think that actually we're doing a great service. But where does your stance land? What I'm interested in is, are you an investor? Do you think you're positively or negatively impacting the economy? And if you're not an investor and you're just an innocent bystander in this, I'd love to know your thoughts towards property investors, and are we buying too much? Let me know in the comments. I'd love a debate on this. I'll try to reply to to as many as possible. If you got value from this video, I'd massively appreciate it if you tap that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And if you're interested in finding out more about property investment, just lightly destroy the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.